This video is going to be focusing on defense mechanisms, which you've probably heard mentioned in some time in your life during some conversation or watching some movie. The term got its start from the psychoanalytic theory, which was spearheaded by, of course, none other than Sigmund Freud. Freud believed that personality is composed of three major components: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the original component of the personality. It is present at birth, and from it the ego and the superego eventually develop. The id operates from the pleasure principle, the impulsive, pleasure-seeking aspect of our being, and it seeks immediate gratification of instinctual needs, regardless of the moral or realistic concerns that pursuing those needs might entail. In contrast, the ego represents the realistic and rational part of the mind, and it is influenced by the reality principle, an awareness of the demands of the environment and of the need to adjust behavior to meet these demands. The ego's decisions are dictated by the realistic consideration rather than by moral judgment. Moral judgment and moralistic considerations are the domain of the superego. The superego is composed of the conscience, which instills guilt feelings about engaging in immoral and unethical behavior, and the ego ideal, which rewards altruistic or moral behavior with feelings of pride. The energy system from which the personality operates occurs through the interplay of instincts. Instincts give rise to our thoughts and actions and fuel their expressions, also known as the impetus. Freud recognized sex and aggression as the dominant instincts because he believed that the society in which he lived placed a strong prohibition on these drives, and that, as a result, people were taught to inhibit them. A profound need to express one's instincts is often frightening and can lead a person to deny that instinct's existence. Most impulses are hidden from one's consciousness, though they nonetheless determine human actions. This inevitably leads to the pressing question of what happens when the ego cannot deal with the demands of our desires, the constraints of our reality, and the moral justice of our conscience. According to Freud, it leads to neurosis, or, in other words, anxiety, which is an altogether unpleasant and, more importantly, unhealthy state of being. Anxiety basically acts as a signal to the ego that things are not going right. Freud identified three types of anxiety. First, neurotic anxiety, which is the unconscious worry that we will lose control of the id's urges, resulting in punishment for inappropriate behavior. Reality anxiety is the fear of real-world events. This cause of anxiety is usually easily identified. For example, a person might fear receiving a dog bite while they are near a menacing dog. The most common way of reducing this anxiety is to avoid the threatening object. And lastly, Freud identified moral anxiety, which involves a fear of violating our own moral principles. In order to deal with these types of anxiety, Freud believed that defense mechanisms helped shield the ego from the conflicts created by the id, superego, and reality. The psychodynamic models of abnormal behavior have two distinguishing features. First, they view disorders as the result of childhood trauma or anxieties, and second, they hold that many of the childhood-based anxieties operate unconsciously. Because experiences are too threatening for the adult to face, they are repressed through mental defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are ego protection strategies that shelter the individual from anxiety, either from neurotic, reality, or moral anxiety. They operate unconsciously and they distort reality. As a result, people exhibit symptoms that they are unable to understand because they are manifestations of the unconscious conflicts. Many defense mechanisms have been identified and theorized about, but I will just be discussing around 7 of the most common and most pressing type of defense mechanisms. The first mechanism, which is quite commonly known, but not known as a real defense mechanism, is denial. Denial is the declaration or thinking that whatever is true is false. It is a refusal to accept reality, external facts, events, and implications due to the nature of the reality threatening the individual. Denial occurs when emotional conflicts are resolved for the individual by a pure refusal to acknowledge unpleasant external realities. For example, an alcoholic refuses to believe his drinking makes an impact on his job performance or his life. Secondly, the defense mechanism of displacement. This is when aggression or even sexual impulses are redirected to a more acceptable party. The emotion is pointed to a safer outlet. So this is pretty much the separation of emotion from its real object. For example, a mother may yell at a child when she feels angry at her husband. In this case, she displaces her anger towards the child because the child appears to be a more acceptable target that is less threatening and has less risk in the outcome of the displacement of the emotion. The next defense mechanism is humor. And while one may think that humor is good for you, when humor is used to avoid certain emotional or anxiety provoking situations, it becomes more of a defense mechanism. Humor allows for the exploration of absurdity, or emotions and ideas that are unpleasant to focus on or too terrible to talk about, in a way that brings pleasure to others. Wit, for example, is a type of humor that displaces. Wit brings attention to the distressing, which remains unpleasant. For example, excessive humor used to mask emotions and avoid addressing underlying true issues. Next is intellectualization. This is taking an extremely objective viewpoint without regard for emotions, focusing on only the intellectual parts of a situation to create distance from relevant anxiety-provoking emotions, avoiding unacceptable emotions by focusing on the intellectual aspects, such as thinking about wishes in an emotionally bland, formal ways and not acting on them. For example, after learning that they have a terminal illness, an individual begins spending all the time studying about the illness to avoid thinking about the direct effects in their own life. Projection, another quite a household term. This is when you're attributing one's own unacknowledged or unacceptable or unwanted thoughts and emotions to another. It reduces the anxiety and allows an expression of an undesirable impulse or desire without conscious awareness. For instance, as an example, assuming that someone you extremely dislikes you. And other examples are severe prejudice, severe jealousy, and hypervigilance to external danger. Reaction formation is another defense mechanism, and reaction formation is overreacting in the opposite way to a fear. So converting unconscious wishes or impulses perceived to be dangerous into opposites, behavior that is completely opposite of what one really wants or one feels, taking opposite beliefs because true belief causes anxiety. This mechanism works effectively for coping in the short term, but it will eventually lead to a breakdown. For example, a manager treats an employee who they extremely dislike ultra kindly, making many special efforts to cater to that person and thus hide the true feelings of dislike, which causes them moral anxiety. And lastly, repression. Repression as a defense mechanism is pulling thoughts into the unconscious. It is preventing the painful or dangerous thoughts from entering consciousness and thus avoiding anxiety. It manifests in ways such as seemingly unexplainable naivety, memory lapse, or lack of awareness of one's own situation and condition. The emotion itself is conscious, but the idea behind it, that emotion, is not present. You're unaware of that emotion, it's in the unconscious. Individuals abused as a child repress feelings and memories, and so that feelings and memories no longer remain in the conscious memory. However, the emotion of that the abuse caused is still there, but the memories are not. Therefore, the abuse continues to affect the individual's behavior and relationships, even though they have repressed the memory of that abuse happening. And that's all for this video. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks.